I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that
She's
is
not going to be
yeah.
saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
I could literally write a PhD thesis on the pseudo-feminism that is criticizing Disney princesses. Criticizing Disney princesses is not feminist.
I want to have a good faith debate about feminism. And I think to do that, we first have to agree that we're not just going to focus on the textbook definition of the word. Because I feel like a lot of people, they do that. They just pull up a definition of a word, but a definition can't really capture all the nuances that an idea like feminism really encompasses.
Not every woman is a leader. Not every woman wants to be a leader. Not every woman wants or craves power, and that's okay.
If you're a woman and you don't want to be in a leadership position or you don't want to be after power, feminism is not saying that you have to. Feminism is saying that you should have the option to if you want.
It is not anti-feminist to want to fall in love, to want to get married, to want to stay at home, to be soft, to want to be a homemaker. None of these things make you less valuable as a person or a woman.
It's not feminism that's saying that there's something invaluable about these decisions or these traits. It's actually society is showing us that it does not care for that. Now, I could reference something like the patriarchy, but then everyone's going to start to roll their eyes and be like, oh, everything's down to patriarchy. But there is an element of truth to that. You see, like all these feelings of wanting to do those things and being judged for them, sure. Are there people who are extremists who are going to try to have that argument? Of course. And I think that to have a good faith argument, we have to understand that a few people outside of this movement don't represent the entire movement. Just because someone says they're a feminist doesn't mean they even know what feminism is or that they actually believe in
The
it.
criticism of Disney princesses is always based on one of two things: criticizing women for things that men get to do unquestioned.
So you won't find a feminist criticizing a woman for something a man gets to get away with. That's really not what a feminist would even go after. I don't believe that their goal is to be like, oh, this thing that a woman has done that a man has also done, but we're only going to focus on the fact that a woman is doing it. That's not necessarily true. Matter of fact, it's the reverse, right? It's usually society that does that to women, that criticizes women for doing things that men are actually praised for, right? That's why if a man is at a company and he's tough and he's a go-getter, he said he's assertive and he knows what he wants. But if a woman does that, well, then she's, naggy or she's, bitchy, or there's a bunch of negative terms used for women who try to do the exact same thing that men do in society already. That's not because of feminists. Understand that. That's because of how society is structured, and that's honestly because of patriarchy. Like, once you see what the patriarchy is, you see it everywhere.
Or writing off a woman entirely because she is or wants to fall in love.
And if a woman wants to fall in love, I don't think a feminist is writing off that person. I don't think a feminist would be like, well, you want to fall in love, therefore you are no longer part of the club. That's not what feminism is fighting for. Matter of fact, a feminist would fight for that woman's right to fall in love and not be judged for that, not seen as lesser than because that is her pursuit. A lot of times feminists step in and they want to try to fight against these things because society as it is currently does not value women when they pursue these things.
We criticize Princess Ariel and completely write her off and say that she's pathetic and has no sense of self because she gave up her voice for the sake of a man, failing to realize that the entire premise of the movie is that he fell in love with the voice that she thought she had to give up because of the evil sea witch in order to be loved by him.
This is an oversimplification of the point. Ariel didn't give up her voice because she thought that's how she would have to fall in love with Eric. She gave up her voice because she was tricked. She didn't think her voice had anything to do with that's what's gonna make him love me, or that's how I have to trade this for the love. That's not something she went in because that doesn't make any logical sense. Her voice had nothing to do with her falling in love with Eric. Matter of fact, he falls in love with her even though he loses her voice. Sure, he initially heard her singing when he woke up from the sea wreck, and that's a play on the concept of mermaids from the old times, of the concept of the sirens, of how they would sing songs and their music was so beautiful it would seduce ships and to come into the rocky places and crash and then marooning people on islands. That's the whole lore of mermaids. That's the whole lore of sirens. So that's the parallel they're making in the movie. Not that Ariel realized she had to give up her voice to get this man. That's not, you're making a connection that I see how you're trying to make that connection, but I don't think there's no evidence to back that up if you know the lore of mermaids and sirens.
And we write off her incredible ability to see past the prejudice that she was born into and think for herself and find out whether or not humans actually were bad and explore her curiosity and find things out for herself instead of just believing everything that everybody else was telling her to believe.
So this point about her being curious and actually going against her prejudice and all that, I would agree with that point if Ariel had gone onto land and then went and explored the world. When she actually gets her legs to go back on land, she's immediately found by the dog who brings him, and they immediately find her. So her reference to humanity is really just Eric and everything around that surrounds or involves him. Because he was on the ship, he's also on the beach, and that's the only real interaction she has. She's taken immediately to his castle. We don't really see Ariel go outside and experience humans outside of Eric. Like, it would have been cool if she had gone on land first and then kind of explored the world and seen things and then found Eric. But her whole experience being human and being on land is tied to Eric. And that's why I could see a feminist having issues with being like, well, who is Ariel aside from Eric? Like, who is she when he's not around? Like, we don't really get that story. And I understand that because the story is a love story. But I can see why people would be upset that, hey, her whole existence is tied to this man and tied to everything she experiences because of this man or around this man or in proximity of this man.
We completely write off Cinderella's incredible capability of having hope and staying kind in the face of years and years and years of abuse solely because she fell in love and happened to marry a prince. And we say that she was waiting for a prince to come save her from her problems, when in reality, there's no real indication of that in the movie whatsoever. When a woman does something altruistic, she's pathetic and has no sense of self. But when a man does something altruistic, he's a hero. When was the last time you heard anybody criticize Hercules for jumping into the depths of the underworld in order to save Meg and giving up everything he had worked his entire life for so that he could be with her?
So when people do comparisons, I feel like we need to do a better job at that, because to compare Cinderella to Hercules is not a one-to-one comparison. You know what I mean? Like, to say that, well, Cinderella did all these things and she suffered all that adversity and she went through all that, and there's no indication that she was waiting for a man to free her from her evil stepsisters and all that. You're right. That's absolutely true. There is no real indication. But again, these stories are focused on the love and the relationship. Like, Cinderella, had it not been for that prince, would have been in that situation for the rest of her life, presumably. We don't know. What you need to do is to just change the genders and keep the story the same. So, for example, take a man and put him in Ariel's situation. If Little Mermaid was about a male mermaid who fell in love with a princess he saw on the ship and then went down and gave up his voice and all that, I promise you, a lot of people would see that mermaid as beta. They'd be like, oh, he's this. Oh, he's not a strong character. That's not a leading man. All that kind of stuff. And the same goes for Cinderella. If Cinderella was Cinderfella, and he was just a dude who was living with his abusive stepbrothers and stepfather, and then all of a sudden, Princess came in town and he made these dope shoes, and he was like, look at my swag, I got the Riz and all that. It was about a guy doing that, which I think they actually did. Disney did make a movie about that. I'm pretty sure they did that.
That would be its own kind of magic.
Yeah, that story would have had the same criticisms from men who would have been like, yo, that guy's a simp, that guy's a beta. Now, the difference with Hercules is that Hercules is an active hero. Both Cinderella and Little Mermaid are passive heroes, meaning that Hercules actively did something to better his situation, or he actively took part in his story, right? So take the character of Hercules and replace it with a woman. Let's say it was about Aphrodite in the same exact context, you know? Like, then you would have seen that story be like, women would be like, yeah, great. She had an active role in her salvation, you know? If Little Mermaid, let's say this, if Ariel's voice had been used in as a powerful thing, right? If there were like sea monsters, and Ariel's song had the ability to destroy sea monsters, and she was known for that. She had this powerful voice that was able to protect the seas and keep this kingdom safe. And then she fell in love with Ariel because she had rescued him from one of these sea monsters. And then Ursula came to her and was like, hey, if you want to be with this man, I can give you legs, but you got to give me your voice. And then Ariel knew that her voice was used to protect the realms, but she sacrificed her voice for that man and then ultimately got her voice back and had the power to defeat Ursula with her voice and used her voice to destroy these sea monsters. Then the sacrifice would have made sense to then compare it to Hercules' sacrifice. But it's not a one-to-one comparison without that. If we're comparing two things, say, well, a guy did this and look at how he's praised, but if a girl did something and you give a completely different scenario, then your comparison doesn't work. Just plug in a woman into that same male scenario or plug a male into that same woman scenario and see how you feel about the outcome. See what the conversation becomes after that.
All you're doing is criticizing women for things that men get to do unquestioned and denying them their right to be or fall in love.
If you took a man and you plugged him into the story of Ariel or into the story of Cinderella, guys would have the exact same problem. Men don't even like to see when like a guy plays a submissive role in a movie or he plays the sidekick. It's always like, well, I thought this story was about this and now it's about that. Like even Wonder Woman, which is Wonder Woman, it's about her. But the fact that Chris Pine's character was more of a sidekick to her, a lot of people had complaints about that. A lot of people had issues. A lot of men were like, hey, well, it's not fair, like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's always going to be the case. So now you're saying that women having those same issues is an attack on women making those choices? No, that's not what feminism is touting. If anything, feminism is saying that, yeah, the story of Ariel is as equal as the story of Hercules. But in society, we don't hold them up to the same.
Real feminism is about depicting women who have different wants and different needs and different personalities, who come from different races and ethnicities, and depicting them all as equally valuable with something to offer and something to say and a voice that should be heard.
I agree with all that. That is what real feminism is about, and that's what real feminists are trying to fight for. But if you act like people hold the story of Ariel and Cinderella with the same esteem and regard as they do the story of Hercules, then I disagree with that. I disagree, and I don't think that that's the case. I think what you're saying about feminism is true, what it should be, right? It should be those things. It should be this celebration of femininity. It should be a celebration of women and having the ability and the rights to go out and try different things and be whatever you want to be. And that's what feminism is fighting for. I think you're focusing on a lot of bad actors and a lot of bad faith feminists or people who call themselves feminists who really just have a chip on their shoulder. And they're using feminism as a way to fight back, whether it's against the patriarchy because they felt wronged by it, or whether it's about something anecdotal or some kind of biased experience that they have in their personal life. And they're hiding behind the mask of feminism to say that this is what I'm really upset about. But we can easily debunk that. We can easily look to say that, well, this is what feminism is, and these are clear examples of feminism, and obviously this person has a bias or an agenda.
Thinking that a woman is any less valuable because she falls in love or because she accepts help from somebody instead of girl bossing her way through her problems is not feminist.
Everything you just said, if you put a man in that same position, he would be seen as weak. He would be seen as not a likable character, not something to live up to, not something to aspire to. Because all those qualities you said are great qualities, but in our society, we do not value those qualities. We just don't. The honest truth is we do not value them in our current society. A lot of people want to tout that motherhood is this strong thing, which I agree. Motherhood, being a mother, raising a family is probably the toughest job or one of the most important jobs there is, right? It's a very prestigious job. It's a very prestigious position. If a woman wants to be a traditional mother and raise her child, then that is a great thing to aspire to be. But let's focus on the fact that in society, we don't hold that with the same prestige, right? Like a woman who decides to be a stay-at-home mom, theoretically, in the way we talk about it, it makes it seem as if we care about that sacrifice, but our actions say otherwise. And a clear example of that is how there is no real barrier to entry to be a mother, right? Or to raise a child or to raise a family. There's no real barrier. There's no real qualifications. The most basic thing is you just got to be able to have sex and have kids. And then you're just a parent now, or you're just a mother. And Yes, I know there's a lot more that goes into being a good mother, and I know there's a lot that goes into raising a good family. I know that, and that's why I put the words good mother and good family, because there are people who are just raising children and they're not doing a good job at it. We have to be honest about that. That in our society, we don't really value that because we allow anybody to do it without any kind of validation or without any kind of certification. Another issue is that if we really hold motherhood to be something of the highest caliber, of the highest element, then why is it that when we are in instances of a divorce, let's say that two people get married, they're in love, but because of infidelity, not because of abuse, not because of that, because people fight against that, but let's say because of infidelity, there is a divorce that happens, and now the mother is divorced from the father. She has to now fight to get half of his earnings, and a lot of people get mad at that. When there's child support that is mandated from the courts of the father, a lot of men are like, oh, you see, this is a problem. She was in it for the money. She wants half of his stuff. Why should she get half? Why should she get half of Michael Jordan's money? Was she in the gym shooting with Jordan when he was doing that? Was she? That's the argument that's always made when the courts decide to give the mother half, right? But if we're honest, even though she's not in the gym with Michael Jordan shooting those shots, her job is just as valuable, right? It's equally valuable, right? Because she's at the house making it a home. She's raising those kids. She's taking care of the family. She's taking care of the home. She's making sure that Michael Jordan, while he's in the gym working, comes back to a home and not just a house. And that has to be equally valuable as what he's doing. But in society, we don't hold those two to be the same because it's always a battle for women to get child support. And let's not even get started on alimony. If you had to tell a man, like, hey, you know what? You guys were married for 15 years, and in those 15 years, she did not work. She stayed at home. She took care of the kids. She raised those children, and you are out working. And now that you guys are getting split, those 15 years of earnings, she's entitled to half of that. Matter of fact, she should be entitled to 2/3 of that because you have children with her. That means you need to live on 1/3 of your income. Men would lose their minds because the truth is we do not value motherhood. We do not value raising a family on the same level as we value people who make money. And that's why rich men are always protecting their money in divorces, because the truth is they do not value a woman making a sacrifice to be a mother or to stay at home as much as they do the money they've earned. And that's what feminism is fighting for. Feminism is fighting for to make sure that women are protected if they should choose to be a housewife, if they should choose to go and abstain from the workplace in order to raise a family. Feminism protects women to make sure that they are valued just as much as the men who are now allowed to go and work because of the sacrifice that women are making. In summation, I don't think that there's a need to demonize feminism. Sure, there are people who are going to use that for their ill-gotten gains or for their own nefarious purposes or for their own selfish purposes. Sure. But we can't look at the idea, we can't look at the movement and say that because of these certain people who are touting feminism or acting like they're feminists, because they are doing it in bad faith, therefore the whole idea is a problem. It's gone too far. Now we're dealing with neo-feminism. This is not classic traditional feminism. Stop. Stop. Little Mermaid came out in 1989. I mean, sure, women had a lot of rights back then, but they have a lot more now. So it only makes sense that people look at that movie and say, hey man, that kind of feels outdated. That's not a criticism on women. That's not a criticism on women who want to be stay-at-home mothers or raise a family. That's not a criticism on that. That is a criticism on the system of patriarchy that was very strong and prevalent during the time this movie is made, and it's attacking that system. It's not attacking those women. And I think it's important that we don't try to fight feminism in order to protect women, in the sense that feminism is doing the same thing. Feminism is trying to protect women from all those who are attacking it. So we have to be very mindful that when we say things like feminists are this or feminism is that, that we make sure that we are not only focusing on anecdotal evidence or biased experiences.